The alarm clock buzzed at 5:30 a.m., but Kevin and Kyle were already awake. The 22-year-old twins had barely slept the night before, too excited about their big day. After 4 long years of college, they were finally graduating, and their dad had planned the perfect celebration trip to Los Angeles. "I still can't believe Dad got us first-class tickets," Kevin said, folding his graduation suit carefully into his suitcase. His twin brother Kyle was doing the same thing at the other end of their shared dorm room. "Yeah," he said, "we deserved it after all our hard work," Kyle replied with a smile. "Remember when we were kids and you used to tell us that education was the key to everything?" Looks like he was right. The brothers had always been close, but college had made their bond even stronger. They studied together, helped each other through tough times, and celebrated every small victory along the way. Both had graduated with honors from their business program, and their father couldn't have been prouder. At the airport, they arrived 2 hours early, just like their dad had taught them. "Always be on time, boys," he would say. "It shows respect for others and for yourself." The twins had learned many life lessons from their father, who had worked his way up from nothing to become successful in the airline industry. The check-in process went smoothly. The lady at the counter smiled when she saw their first-class tickets. "You boys are in for a treat today," she said. "These are some of the best seats on the plane." Walking through the airport, both brothers felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This wasn't their first time flying, but it was their first time in first class. They had always flown economy before, saving money for more important things, like books and school supplies. "Do you think we'll look out of place?" Kyle asked quietly as they walked toward their gate. "What do you mean?" Kevin responded, though he knew exactly what his brother meant. They had both noticed the looks they sometimes got when they were in spaces where people didn't expect to see young black men. It was something they had learned to deal with over the years, but it never stopped being uncomfortable. "I mean, first class is usually full of business people and wealthy folks," Kyle explained. "We're just college kids." Kevin put his hand on his brother's shoulder. "Dad paid for these seats fair and square. We belong there just as much as anyone else. Besides, we're not just college kids anymore. We're college graduates." At the gate, they found seats and waited for their boarding call. Kyle pulled out his phone and started taking pictures. "Mom's going to want to see everything," he said. Their mother had been just as excited about the trip as they were, making sure they packed everything they needed and reminding them to call her when they landed. "Look at all these people," Kevin observed, watching the busy airport around them. "Everyone's going somewhere important, chasing their dreams." "Just like us," Kyle added. "You know, I never thought I'd see the day when we'd be sitting in first class on a plane." "Dad always said hard work pays off," Kevin reminded him. 4 years of studying, working part-time jobs, and keeping our grades up. We earned this." When first-class boarding was called, the twins gathered their carry-on bags and walked to the gate. The flight attendant checked their boarding passes and smiled. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen. Your seats are 2A and 2B, right up front." Walking onto the plane was like entering a different world. The first-class cabin was spacious and elegant, with wide leather seats and plenty of legroom. The twins had watched movies where people flew first class, but experiencing it in person was completely different. "This is incredible," Kyle whispered as they found their seats. The chairs were bigger than anything they had ever sat in on a plane, with personal entertainment screens and places to charge their phones. A flight attendant approached them with a warm smile. "Can I get you gentlemen anything to drink before we take off?" "Just water, please," Kevin said politely. "Same for me," Kyle added. As they settled in, both brothers took a moment to appreciate how far they had come. Just 4 years ago, they were starting college with big dreams but limited resources. Their dad had worked extra hours to help pay for their education, and their mom had packed their lunches every day to save money. "You know what the best part of this is?" Kyle said, adjusting his seatbelt. "What's that?" "Dad's going to be so proud when we tell him about our job interviews. Next week, 2 major companies want to hire us." Kevin nodded. He always said that if we worked hard and stayed focused, opportunities would come. I guess he was right. The plane was slowly filling up with passengers. Most of the people in first class were older, dressed in business suits, carrying expensive briefcases. Some were already on their phones, making important calls about meetings and deals. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to be one of those business travelers? Kyle asked, watching a man in an expensive suit talking loudly about $1 million contract. Maybe someday we will be, Kevin replied. But right now, I'm just happy to be here with my brother, celebrating everything we've accomplished. As more passengers boarded, the twins noticed something that made them slightly uncomfortable. Several people walking past their seats did double takes, looking surprised to see two young black men sitting in first class. Some passengers' expressions seemed friendly enough, but others looked puzzled or even disapproving. Did you see that? Kyle whispered to his brother. Yeah, I saw it, Kevin replied quietly. Just ignore it. We have every right to be here. The twins had dealt with situations like this before. Growing up, they had learned from their parents how to handle uncomfortable stares and whispered comments. Their father had always told them to hold their heads high and remember that they belonged anywhere they had earned the right to be. Remember what Dad always says, Kevin reminded his brother. Your character is more important than other people's opinions, Kyle smiled. Yeah, and Mom always adds, kill them with kindness and success. As the final passengers boarded, the twins focused on the positive aspects of their journey. They talked about their college memories, their future plans, and how excited they were to see Los Angeles. They had never been to the West Coast before, and their dad had planned a full itinerary of sightseeing and celebrations. I can't wait to see the Hollywood sign, Kyle said. And the beach, Kevin added. We're going to have the best time. The flight attendants were preparing for takeoff, going through their safety demonstrations and checking that everyone was properly seated. The twins watched attentively, still amazed that they were actually sitting in first class. This is really happening, Kyle said with a big smile. We're really doing this. Yeah, we are, Kevin agreed, and we deserve every minute of it. Neither brother had any idea that their peaceful journey was about to take a completely unexpected turn. They were simply two young men who had worked hard, achieved their goals, and were ready to celebrate with a well-deserved trip. In just a few minutes, however, their celebration would be interrupted by an incident that would test everything. Their parents had taught them about dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right. For now, though, they were just two brothers happy to be together, grateful for their opportunities and excited about their future. The plane was almost ready for takeoff. Kevin and Kyle had been enjoying their first-class experience, taking pictures to show their parents later. The flight attendants were making their final checks, and most passengers had settled into their seats with their seatbelts fastened. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be taking off in about 15 minutes, the captain announced over the intercom. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure. Kevin was reading the in-flight magazine while Kyle was looking out the window at the busy airport ground crew. Everything seemed normal until they noticed one of the flight attendants walking toward them with a strange expression on her face. The flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, approached their row with what looked like a forced smile. Her name tag read Linda, and she was carrying a clipboard and looking somewhat nervous. Excuse me, gentlemen, Linda said, stopping right next to their seats. I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a small problem. Kevin looked up from his magazine. What kind of problem? Well, it seems there's been a mistake with the seating system, Linda explained, though she wouldn't make direct eye contact with either brother. Your seats have been double booked, and we need to move you to different seats, Kyle frowned. Double booked? But we checked in hours ago. How does that happen? Computer error, Linda replied quickly. These things happen sometimes. But don't worry, we have two very nice seats available in economy class. You'll be much more comfortable there. The twins looked at each other, both confused and suspicious. Kevin pulled out his phone and showed Linda their boarding passes. Look, we have seats 2A and 2B. Our boarding passes are valid, and we were here first. I understand your confusion, Linda said, her voice getting slightly impatient. But the system shows these seats belong to other passengers. They'll be boarding any minute now. Kyle stood up slightly to look around the first-class cabin. I don't see anyone else claiming these seats. And we've been sitting here for 20 minutes already. Sir, please remain seated, Linda said firmly. I need you both to gather your belongings and follow me to your new seats. We're trying to stay on schedule here. Kevin felt his heart starting to beat faster. Something didn't feel right about this situation. Can you show us the computer error you're talking about? We'd like to see what the problem is. Linda's face reddened slightly. I don't need to show you anything. I'm telling you there's been a mistake and you need to move, now. Other passengers. In first class, we're starting to notice the commotion. Some were pretending to read their magazines while obviously listening to every word. Others were more obvious about their staring, with a few even pulling out their phones. This doesn't make sense, Kyle said, trying to keep his voice calm. We paid for these seats. Our father bought these tickets for us as a graduation gift. Why should we have to move when we haven't done anything wrong? Look, I don't have time to argue with you, Linda snapped. There are passengers waiting to board and you're holding up the entire flight. Either you move voluntarily or I'll have to call security. The word security made several nearby passengers look up from their phones and magazines. An older businessman across the aisle shook his head and muttered something under his breath. Kevin took a deep breath, remembering his father's advice about staying calm in difficult situations. Ma'am, we're not trying to cause any trouble. We just want to understand why we're being asked to leave seats that we paid for and were assigned to us. I've already explained the situation, Linda replied, her voice getting louder. There was a computer error, and these seats belong to other passengers. I don't know how I can make it any clearer than that. Kyle pulled out his phone and showed Linda their confirmation email. Here's our confirmation from when Dad bought the tickets 3 weeks ago. Everything shows seats 2A and 2B in first class. Linda barely glanced at the phone. I don't care what your phone says. I'm telling you what the computer system is showing right now. An elderly woman sitting nearby turned to her husband and whispered, This doesn't seem right. Those boys were here when I boarded. Her husband nodded. Something's not adding up here. Kevin and Kyle could hear the whispered conversations around them. Some passengers seemed to be on their side, while others appeared uncomfortable with the entire situation. Can we speak to your supervisor? Kevin asked politely. If there's really been a computer error, maybe someone else can help figure out what happened. I am the supervisor for this section, Linda lied, though her nervous fidgeting suggested otherwise. And I'm telling you for the last time, you need to move to economy class right now. Kyle felt his frustration growing, but he kept his voice steady. We're not refusing to cooperate. We just want to understand what's happening. If you can show us these other passengers who supposedly have our seats, we'll be happy to discuss it. I don't have to show you anything, Linda said, her patience clearly running out. You're being disruptive, and if you don't move immediately, I'll have no choice but to call airport security. The threat of security made the atmosphere in the cabin even more tense. Several passengers were now openly watching the confrontation, and some were recording with their phones. A young woman in the row behind them spoke up. Excuse me, but I saw these 2 gentlemen board with the first-class passengers. They've been sitting here the whole time. Linda turned around sharply. Ma'am, please stay out of this. This is none of your business. Actually, it kind of is my business, the woman replied. I'm watching 2 paying customers get harassed for no apparent reason. An older black businessman sitting a few rows back stood up and walked over. What exactly is the problem here? He asked Linda directly. Sir, please return to your seat, Linda said, clearly flustered by the growing attention. This is between me and these 2 passengers. I don't think so, the businessman replied. I've been flying for 30 years and I've never seen anyone get kicked out of paid seats because of a supposed computer error, especially not 20 minutes after they've been sitting there. More passengers were starting to pay attention now. The cabin was filling with tension, and Linda was clearly losing control of the situation. This is ridiculous, Linda said, her voice rising. I'm trying to do my job here, and everyone's making it impossible. Kevin stood up slowly, his hands visible and his voice calm. Ma'am, we're not trying to make your job difficult. We're just two college graduates trying to enjoy a gift from our father. We don't understand why we're being singled out. You're not being singled out, Linda insisted, though her explanation sounded weak even to her own ears. This is just a seating issue that needs to be resolved. Kyle also stood up, equally calm and respectful. If there's really been a computer error, can't you just call the gate agent to verify our tickets? That would settle this whole thing in 2 minutes. Linda's face showed panic for just a moment before she composed herself. I don't need to call anyone. I know what I'm doing. The businessman who had stood up earlier shook his head. Lady, I work in customer service, and this isn't how you handle a seating issue. This is how you create a discrimination lawsuit. How dare you, Linda snapped. I resent the implication that this has anything to do with discrimination. This is purely a seating matter. But her protests were falling on increasingly skeptical ears. The passengers around them were clearly not buying her explanation, and several were continuing to record the interaction. Kevin looked at his brother, and they both knew they were in an impossible situation. They could either accept the unfair treatment and move to economy, or they could continue to stand their ground and risk being removed from the plane entirely. Kyle, Kevin said quietly, maybe we should call Dad. Kevin pulled out his phone and looked at his brother. I think it's time to call Dad, he said quietly. Kyle nodded. Yeah, he needs to know what's happening here. Linda overheard them and rolled her eyes. Oh, great, now you're going to call your daddy to complain? That's not going to change anything. You still need to move to economy class. The businessman who had been defending them earlier spoke up again. Actually, calling a parent when you're being treated unfairly is exactly what any smart person would do. Kevin scrolled through his contacts and found his father's number. His hands were slightly shaking, not from fear, but from frustration and disbelief at the whole situation. Dad's probably in a meeting, Kyle whispered. But he always answers when we call. Kevin pressed the call button and put the phone to his ear. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered. Hey son, how's the flight going? Are you boys enjoying? First class? Dad, we have a problem, Kevin said, trying to keep his voice steady. We're still on the ground, and a flight attendant is trying to make us move to economy class. There was a pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean trying to make you move? What reason did they give? She says there was a computer error and our seats were double booked, Kevin explained. But Dad, we've been sitting here for almost half an hour, and no one else has shown up claiming these seats. Kevin's father, David, was quiet for a moment. As the CEO of one of the largest airline companies in the country, he knew exactly how seating systems worked. Double booking in first class was extremely rare, and when it did happen, it was handled very differently than what his sons were describing. Put me on speaker, Kevin, David said. I want to hear exactly what's going on. Kevin switched to speakerphone. Okay, Dad, you're on speaker now. Which airline are you flying? David asked. Skyline Airways, Flight 447 to Los Angeles, Kyle answered. David felt his jaw tighten. Skyline Airways was owned by his company, Meridian Airlines. His own sons were being discriminated against on one of his own planes. Boys, is the flight attendant still there? David asked, his voice calm but with an edge that his sons recognized. Yes, she's right here, Kevin replied. Linda had been listening to the conversation with growing impatience. She stepped forward and said loudly, Sir, I don't care who you are or who you think you know. Your sons need to move to economy class, and that's final. Actually, David said, his voice becoming very professional, I'd like to speak with you directly. Can you take the phone? Linda laughed sarcastically. I'm not talking to some angry parent who thinks his kids are special. This is airline business, not family drama. Several passengers were still recording, and the woman behind the twins shook her head in disgust. This is unbelievable, she muttered. David heard Linda's response through the speakerphone. Ma'am, my name is David Richardson. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Airlines, which owns Skyline Airways. I think you should take this phone call. The color drained from Linda's face so quickly that several passengers noticed. She Looked like she had just seen a ghost. Did you just say you're the CEO of Meridian Airlines? Linda stammered. That's correct, David replied calmly. And I'm very interested to hear your explanation for why you're removing my sons from seats they paid for on an airplane that I ultimately oversee. Linda's hands started shaking as she reached for the phone. The entire first-class cabin had gone completely silent. Even passengers who hadn't been paying attention before were now watching the drama unfold. Mr. Richardson? Linda said into the phone, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, this is David Richardson. Can you please explain to me what computer error has caused you to ask my sons to give up their confirmed first-class seats? Linda looked around the cabin desperately, as if searching for an escape route. Sir, There was a system notification about their seats being needed for other passengers. What other passengers? David asked. My sons have been sitting there for 30 minutes. If there were other passengers with legitimate claims to those seats, where are they? They're boarding soon, Linda said weakly. Ma'am, I've been in the airline industry for over 20 years. I know exactly how our boarding procedures work. First-class passengers board first. And if there was a genuine double-booking situation, it would have been resolved at the gate before anyone boarded the aircraft. Linda was now visibly sweating. Several flight attendants from other sections had come over to see what was happening, and they looked just as shocked as Linda did. Sir, perhaps I made an error in judgment, Linda said, trying to save face. Maybe we can work something out. Oh, we're definitely going to work something out, David replied. But first, I want you to explain to me and to everyone listening why you decided that my sons, who have valid boarding passes and have been sitting peacefully in their assigned seats, needed to be moved to economy class. The cabin was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Passengers were leaning forward in their seats, hanging on every word of the conversation. I believe there might be passengers with higher priority, Linda said, her excuse sounding ridiculous even as she said it. Higher priority than paying customers with confirmed reservations? David asked. Can you explain what that means? Linda realized she had dug herself into a hole she couldn't get out of. Sir, I may have misunderstood the situation. Let me ask you a direct question, David said, his voice becoming very serious. If my sons were two young white men in business suits, would you have asked them to move to economy class based on this supposed computer error? The question hung in the air like a bomb. Everyone in first class knew the answer, even if Linda wouldn't say it out loud. Sir, This had nothing to do with. I was just following procedures. Linda stumbled over her words. What procedures? David pressed. Show me the manual that says flight attendants should remove passengers from paid seats based on their appearance or their age or their race. Another flight attendant, an older man named Robert, stepped forward. Mr. Richardson, this is Robert Martinez, the senior flight attendant. I've been monitoring this situation, and I can tell you there was no computer error and no double booking notification for seats 2A and 2B. Linda shot Robert a look of pure panic. Her coworker had just exposed her lie to the CEO of the company. Thank you, Robert, David said. I appreciate your honesty. Can you tell me what you observed? Sir, your sons boarded with the other first-class passengers, presented valid boarding passes, and have been sitting quietly in their assigned seats. There was no system error, no double booking, and no other passengers claiming those seats. David took a deep breath. Linda, are you still there? Yes, sir, Linda replied, her voice shaking. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have just attempted to remove two paying customers from their seats based on nothing more than your own prejudices. You lied about computer errors, you threatened to call security on passengers who were doing nothing wrong, and you created a hostile environment for other passengers. Linda was now crying, realizing that her career was probably over. But here's what's going to happen next, David continued. You're going to apologize to my sons, you're going to return to your duties, and when this flight lands, you're going to report to your supervisor for a full investigation. Yes, sir, Linda whispered. And Linda? This conversation is being recorded by multiple passengers. Your behavior today is going to be reviewed by our Human Resources Department, our legal team, and possibly by federal aviation authorities. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a slight delay while we address a customer service issue. We apologize for any inconvenience. David spoke to his sons again. Boys, I'm proud of how you handled this situation. You stayed calm, you were respectful, and you stood up for yourselves. That's exactly what your mother and I taught you to do. Thanks, Dad, Kevin said, feeling a mix of relief and vindication. I'm going to make some calls now, David continued. This plane isn't going anywhere until we get this sorted out properly. Linda handed the phone back to Kevin with trembling hands. Her face was pale, and she looked like she might faint at any moment. The other passengers in first class were staring at her with a mixture of shock and disgust. I'm so sorry. Linda whispered to the twins, but her apology felt hollow and desperate. I made a terrible mistake. Kevin and Kyle looked at each other. They could see that Linda was only sorry because she got caught, not because she understood how wrong her actions were. Boys, I'm still here, their father's voice came through the phone speaker. I want you to know that I'm handling this situation personally. Thanks, Dad, Kyle said. We really appreciate you taking our call. You never have to thank me for standing up for what's right, David replied. Now I need to make some calls. Stay exactly where you are. As soon as David hung up, word began spreading through the cabin like wildfire. Passengers were whispering to each other, sharing what they had just witnessed. Many were shaking their heads in disbelief. Did that really just happen? Asked the elderly woman who had been watching the whole situation. Did that flight attendant really try to kick off the CEO's sons? Her husband nodded. And not just any CEO, the CEO of the company that owns this airline. The businessman who had defended the twins earlier walked over to Kevin and Kyle. Boys, I want you to know that what happened here was completely wrong, and I'm glad your father is in a position to do something about it. Thank you for speaking up for us, Kevin said. It means a lot that you and other passengers saw what was really happening. That's what decent people do, the businessman replied. We look out for each other. Meanwhile, Linda was standing at the front of the first-class section, looking completely lost. Robert, the senior flight attendant, approached her with a serious expression. Linda, what were you thinking? Robert asked quietly. In 20 years of flying, I've never seen anything like what you just did. I don't know, Linda replied, tears streaming down her face. I saw those two young men in first class and I just assumed. I thought maybe they didn't belong there. You thought they didn't belong in seats they paid for? Robert asked, his voice filled with disappointment. Do you realize what you've done? You've not only humiliated yourself and our company, but you've put everyone's jobs at risk. Other flight attendants had gathered around, and they were all looking at Linda with shock and embarrassment. They knew that her actions would reflect badly on all of them. Captain Johnson's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the continued delay. We're working to resolve a situation, and we'll have more information for you shortly. In the cockpit, Captain Johnson was on the phone with airport operations. Yes, I understand, Mr. Richardson is on his way to the airport. No, we're not taking off until he gets here. Back in the cabin, passengers were becoming more vocal about what they had witnessed. The young woman who had first spoken up for the twins was showing her phone to other passengers. I got the whole thing on video, she said. This is going to go viral. People need to see how these two young men were treated. An older gentleman across the aisle nodded. In my day, we called this exactly what it is, discrimination, plain and simple. Kevin and Kyle were trying to stay calm, but they could feel the weight of everyone's attention. They had never been in a situation like this before, where their personal experience had become a public spectacle. You okay? Kyle asked his brother quietly. Yeah, I think so, Kevin replied. It's just weird, having everyone staring at us. At least they're on our side now, Kyle pointed out. A flight attendant from the economy section came up to first class and whispered something to Robert. His expression became even more serious. "Linda," Robert said, "I just got word that Mr. Richardson's plane has landed at the airport. He's on his way to our gate right now." Linda's face went completely white. "He's coming here? Now?" "Yes, and he's bringing airport security and company supervisors with him," Robert explained. "This is about to become a much bigger situation." The passengers overheard this news, and the buzz of conversation grew louder. Everyone was curious to see what would happen when the CEO arrived. "I can't believe this is happening," Linda said, slumping into a jump seat. "My career is over." "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat paying customers like criminals," said a passenger from the back of the first-class section. 5 minutes later, there was activity at the gate. Through the plane's windows, passengers could see several official-looking people walking toward the aircraft. Captain Johnson came out of the cockpit and walked directly to where Kevin and Kyle were sitting. "Gentlemen, I'm Captain Johnson. I want to personally apologize for what happened on my aircraft today." "Thank you, Captain," Kevin said. "We appreciate that. Your father is here, and he's bringing some people with him to handle this situation properly," Captain Johnson explained. "I want you to know that what happened today does not represent the values of our airline or our crew." The captain looked directly at Linda. "What you did today was unacceptable and unprofessional. You've embarrassed yourself, your colleagues, and this company." Linda couldn't even look at the captain. She just sat with her head in her hands, crying. Airport security officers boarded the plane, followed by several people in business suits. And then David Richardson stepped onto the aircraft. Even though he was their father, Kevin and Kyle were impressed by how commanding their dad looked in his business suit. He had the presence of someone who was used to being in charge and making important decisions. "Dad?" Kyle said, standing up to hug his father. David hugged both of his sons tightly. "Are you boys okay? Did anyone hurt you or threaten you?" "We're fine, Dad," Kevin assured him. "Just frustrated and confused about why this happened." David looked around the first-class cabin, taking in all the passengers who were watching the scene unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm David Richardson, CEO of Meridian Airlines. I want to apologize to all of you for the delay and for the unprofessional behavior you witnessed today." Several passengers nodded appreciatively. One woman spoke up. "Mr. Richardson, your sons handled themselves with dignity and grace. You should be very proud of them." "I am proud of them," David replied. "They were raised to treat others with respect and to stand up for themselves when they're treated unfairly." David then turned his attention to Linda, who was still crying in the jump seat. "Are you Linda?" "Yes, sir," she whispered, not looking up. "I want you to explain to me, in front of all these witnesses, why you thought it was appropriate to remove my sons from their paid seats." Linda looked up with red, puffy eyes. "Mr. Richardson, I made a terrible judgment call. I saw 2 young black men in first class, and I assumed they didn't belong there. I know now how wrong I was." The honesty of her admission shocked everyone in the cabin. At least she was finally telling the truth about her motivations. "So you're admitting that you discriminated against my sons based on their race?" David asked directly. "Yes, sir," Linda said quietly. "I did, and I'm deeply ashamed of my actions." David nodded. "At least you're being honest now. That's more than you were 20 minutes ago when you were lying about computer errors." The airport supervisors who had boarded with David were taking notes and recording the conversation. This was now an official investigation that would have serious consequences. David Richardson looked around the first-class cabin at all the passengers who had witnessed the discrimination against his sons. He knew that this moment would define not just Linda's future, but how his company would be seen by the public. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced to everyone on the plane, "I want each of you to know that what happened here today is not acceptable, and it will never be tolerated in our company." The passengers nodded approvingly. Many had their phones out. Still recording everything that was happening, David turned back to Linda, who was sitting in the jump seat looking completely defeated. "Linda, you're going to be escorted off this aircraft immediately." You're suspended pending a full investigation, and you will not be working on any of our flights until this matter is resolved. I understand, sir, Linda said quietly, finally. Accepting the consequences of her actions, 2 airport security officers stepped forward. Ma'am, please gather your belongings and come with us, one of them said professionally, but firmly. As Linda stood up to leave, several passengers couldn't help but express their feelings about what they had witnessed. Good, said the elderly woman who had been watching from the beginning. Actions have consequences. The businessman who had defended the twins earlier spoke up. Mr. Richardson, I want you to know that your sons were respectful and dignified throughout this entire ordeal. They're a credit to their upbringing. David smiled proudly at Kevin and Kyle. Their mother and I have always taught them to handle difficult situations with grace and dignity. Today they proved they learned those lessons well. After Linda was removed from the plane, David addressed the remaining crew members. Robert, as the senior flight attendant, you'll be in charge of this cabin for the remainder of the flight. I want every passenger on this plane to receive exceptional service. Absolutely, Mr. Richardson, Robert replied. We'll make sure everyone has a great experience. David then spoke to Captain Johnson. Captain, I want you to file a detailed report about everything that happened here today. This incident will be used as a training example for all our employees. Yes, sir, Captain Johnson said. I'll have the full report ready within 24 hours. One of the company supervisors who had come with David stepped forward. Sir, should we delay the flight any longer? David looked at his watch. No, we've kept these passengers waiting long enough. Captain Johnson, you're cleared for takeoff as soon as you're ready. Before David left the plane, he wanted to make sure his sons were truly okay. He sat down next to them in the aisle. Boys, I know this wasn't the celebration flight you were expecting, David said softly. Are you sure you're all right? We're okay, Dad, Kevin assured him. It was scary and frustrating, but we knew we had to stand up for ourselves. And we knew you'd believe us and help us, Kyle added. That made all the difference. David hugged both of his sons again. I'm incredibly proud of both of you. Not just for how you handled this situation, but for everything you've accomplished. Your college graduation, your job interviews next week, you're both going to do amazing things. The passengers around them were listening to this family moment, and many were smiling at the obvious love and support between the father and his sons. Dad, will Linda really lose her job? Kevin asked. David thought for a moment before answering. Son, Linda made a choice today to treat you unfairly because of the color of your skin. That's not just wrong, it's illegal. Companies like ours have a responsibility to make sure all customers are treated with respect and dignity. I almost feel sorry for her, Kyle said. She seemed really scared when she realized who you were. That's because you have good hearts, David replied. But, Kyle, she wasn't sorry for what she did. She was only sorry she got caught. There's a big difference. A young mother sitting nearby with her children spoke up. Mr. Richardson, I want my kids to see this. I want them to understand that when someone is treated unfairly, good people stand up and do something about it. David smiled at the woman. That's exactly right. We all have a responsibility to speak up when we see injustice. The woman's teenage daughter asked, Mr. Richardson, will this really change anything? Or will it just happen again to someone else? It was a smart question that made David pause and think carefully about his answer. Young lady, you've asked a very important question, David said. One incident like this won't change everything overnight. But every time we refuse to accept discrimination, every time we hold people accountable for their actions, we make progress. David stood up and addressed all the passengers one more time. I want to make a promise to everyone here today. Within the next month, every employee in our company will go through updated training on treating all customers with respect and dignity. What happened here will never happen again if I have anything to say about it. The passengers burst into spontaneous applause. Many were clearly moved by David's commitment to making real changes. Furthermore, David continued, I'm going to personally review our hiring practices and our company policies to make sure we're doing everything possible to create an inclusive environment for both our employees and our customers. Before leaving the plane, David shook hands with several of the passengers who had spoken up for his sons. "Thank you for standing up for what's right," he told the businessman who had first defended Kevin and Kyle. "Sir, I've got kids of my own," the man replied. "I'd hope someone would do the same for them if they were ever in this situation." David also thanked the young woman who had recorded everything on her phone. "Your video evidence will be very important in our investigation," he told her. "I'm planning to post it online," she said. "People need to see what really happened here." "I understand," David replied. "Just please make sure you focus on the positive, how the crew corrected the situation and how the company took responsibility." As David prepared to leave, Kevin called out to him, "Dad, are you still going to meet us in Los Angeles?" "Of course," David smiled. "I'll be there when you land. We're still going to celebrate your graduation properly." "Will you tell Mom what happened?" Kyle asked. "I'll call her as soon as I get off this plane," David promised. "She's going to be just as proud of you boys as I am." After David left, the atmosphere on the plane was completely different. Robert and the other flight attendants went out of their way to make sure everyone was comfortable and happy. "Can I get you gentlemen anything special?" Robert asked Kevin and Kyle. "After what you've been through, the least we can do is make sure the rest of your flight is perfect." "Just some water would be great," Kevin said. "Actually," Kyle added, with a smile, "maybe we could see the dessert menu." "All this excitement made us hungry," Robert laughed. "Coming right up. And boys, for what it's worth, you handled yourselves like real gentlemen today." As the plane finally took off, passengers continued to approach Kevin and Kyle throughout the flight. A retired teacher told them how proud she was of their courage. A young father said he hoped his children would be as brave if they ever faced discrimination. By the time they landed in Los Angeles, videos of the incident were already spreading on social media. But instead of just showing the discrimination, the videos also showed how quickly the company responded, how the CEO took personal responsibility, and how the twins maintained their dignity throughout the ordeal. 6 months later, Kevin and Kyle were invited to speak at a conference about diversity in the airline industry. Linda was indeed fired after a thorough investigation, but the company also implemented comprehensive changes that made air travel safer and more welcoming for everyone. The twins learned that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And their father proved that real leadership means taking responsibility and making sure that everyone is treated with respect and dignity, no matter who they are or where they come from.